Before we begin this disturbing story, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss any of our true crime documentaries, where every detail matters and every case reveals the darkest side of reality. Also, leave a like. It helps this content reach more people and supports our work. A meeting in a secluded park. A simple child support check as the excuse. And a kiss that should never have happened. What seemed like just another chapter in a troubled divorce would turn into one of the most disturbing attempted murders ever recorded. A case that shocked seasoned detectives and defied logic itself. That day, Tiffany Mead, a young mother of only 22 years old, thought she was about to settle yet another issue left behind by her failed marriage. On the other side, her ex-husband, Kris, appeared calm. But within minutes, everything would turn into a bloody nightmare. A brutal attack, a victim who barely survived, and an aggressor who, instead of fleeing or showing remorse, reacted in such a twisted way that it forever marked this case. What really happened inside that car? Who was telling the truth? And how did investigators manage to uncover a plot even darker than the attempted murder itself? Today, you will discover every detail of this story, from the beginning of Tiffany and Kris's relationship to the moment when an alleged hitman entered the picture and changed the course of the investigation. Prepare yourself, because this is not just another crime case. It's a deep dive into the mind of someone capable of turning love into hate and a kiss into a death sentence. Tiffany Mead was not just another statistic. At only 22 years old, she was a devoted mother, dividing her life between the responsibilities of raising her young child and the weight of an early divorce. Friends described her as someone with an easy smile, yet silently carrying frustration of a relationship that had turned into torment. Her marriage to Kris at first seemed promising. Like many young couples, they believed they were building a stable life, filled with promises for the future. But daily life quickly revealed deep cracks, constant arguments, accusations of jealousy, and a home filled with resentment. What had begun with vows of love ended with bitter disputes over money, child custody, and above all, control. Kris, in turn, was seen by some as an ordinary man, but by others as someone hiding a darker temperament behind a calm exterior. He had never fully accepted the end of the marriage. And with every encounter with Tiffany, especially when their son was involved, the tension escalated. These were not just financial disagreements. It was as if every meeting became a silent battle, where sharp words carried the weight of unspoken threats. For Tiffany, separation did not mean immediate freedom. On the contrary, she felt trapped in a cycle of obligatory encounters, where every attempt at conversation came with the fear of what Kris might do. The divorce had been finalized on paper, but the real struggle was far from over. And it was in this climate of distrust and festering resentment that the meeting at the park was set. Tiffany believed it would be nothing more than the routine delivery of a child support check. But in Kris's heart, that meeting carried a far darker purpose. On that stifling afternoon, Tiffany drove to the meeting point believing it would be nothing more than another tiresome obligation. Receiving a child support check from Kris and then heading back home. The chosen spot was an ordinary park, with tall trees filtering the sunlight and quiet paths almost deserted. A place that, for many, would seem peaceful, but for her, it carried an invisible tension. Kris parked the car with the almost theatrical calm of someone who knows how to conceal intentions. His gestures were restrained, his voice steady. To any distant observer, he looked like just a man dealing with formalities with his ex-wife. Tiffany, on the other hand, carried the exhaustion of someone who no longer expected anything but hostility. She simply wanted it to be over quickly, but normality didn't last long. Inside the car, the atmosphere shifted abruptly. Kris leaned closer and, in a sudden move, shattered any illusion of civility. He grabbed her forcefully, pressed his hand over her mouth to silence her, and with the other, pulled out a sharp object, one that authorities would never recover. In a single motion, the quiet of the park was ripped apart by the brutal slash across her neck. The shock was immediate. Tiffany clutched the wound as blood poured uncontrollably. The pain was excruciating, but what truly froze her was Kris's reaction. Instead of panic or remorse, he leaned even closer and whispered with chilling calm, "Don't scream. Stay calm." Then, As if sealing the horror, he pressed his lips against hers. It wasn't affection, it was possession. A grotesque kiss, a macabre signature of a man who had just tried to kill. In that instant, Tiffany thought her life was over, yet her instinct to survive refused to surrender. Even in shock, battling the agony and terror, she summoned the strength to escape the car and fight for her life. Each movement left a trail of blood, each second stretched into an eternity. With trembling hands, she managed to dial 911. Her voice, broken and confused, told dispatchers that she had hurt herself, a statement that would later puzzle investigators and cast doubt on what had truly happened. Why would a victim accuse herself? Was it fear, psychological manipulation, or simply the fractured reasoning of someone on the brink of death? That park, once a backdrop for family outings and innocent walks, had become the stage of a living nightmare. A calculated attack, a cold-blooded aggressor, and a young mother who, against all odds, refused to give up her life without a fight. The car that only minutes earlier had been the setting of a tense conversation had now turned into a stage of despair. Tiffany fought against her own body, pressing her hands against a wound that seemed impossible to contain. Blood streamed in thick rivulets, staining everything around her, while her mind wavered between fragile consciousness and the darkness of imminent collapse. Yet, on the very edge between life and death, the instinct to survive roared louder than panic. Shaking, she managed to break free from Kris and reach her phone. Her voice cracked, her breath short, her words stumbling over each other as she dialed 911. On the other end of the line, dispatchers heard a mixture of sobs, terror, and fragmented sentences. Among them, one statement left everyone baffled. Tiffany said she had hurt herself. Minutes later, the shrill cry of sirens shattered the silence of the park. When paramedics arrived, they were confronted with nightmare made real. A young woman drenched in blood, fading inside a car splattered in red, and beside her, a man far too calm for the gravity of the scene. Kris's chilling composure did not go unnoticed. The emergency crew rushed into action. Every second mattered. Tiffany was strapped to a stretcher, rushed into the ambulance, and delivered to the hospital in critical condition. As doctors prepared for surgery, the severity of her injury became clear. A deep slash that had missed her death by mere centimeters. Still, the initial words she had spoken to emergency responders echoed as an unsolved riddle. Why would a victim, so clearly attacked, take responsibility for an almost fatal wound? Was it fear of immediate retaliation, an unconscious attempt to protect her attacker, or simply the disoriented reasoning of someone in shock, bleeding out and struggling to remain lucid? This contradiction would later become one of the central points of the investigation, a detail the defense would cling to in their efforts to shield Kris from justice. Hours later, stabilized at the hospital, Tiffany finally gathered the strength to reveal what had truly happened. And this time, without hesitation, she named Kris as the man who had tried to kill her. That revelation would completely alter the course of the investigation, transforming what first looked like a personal tragedy into a criminal case that would haunt everyone involved. Tiffany's statement at the hospital completely changed the direction of the case. Up until that moment, paramedics and the first officers on the scene had dealt with the possibility of an accident, or even a suicide attempt. But now, there was a direct accusation. Kris Ertman, her ex-husband, was the one who had slashed her throat. Sergeant Bob Thompson was among the first to examine the crime scene. With years of experience, he quickly realized that something didn't add up. Blood was scattered in patterns that suggested a struggle, but Tiffany's initial version, that she had injured herself, still lingered over the investigation. For police, it was crucial to separate fact from premature interpretation. Investigators combed through every detail. Tiffany's car was drenched in blood, but the weapon itself was gone. No knife, no sharp object was ever found at the scene, nor in any of the follow-up searches. This absence of physical evidence raised uncomfortable questions. Had Kris truly attacked her, or could Tiffany have staged parts of the incident? Doubt deepened when an anonymous letter arrived at the police station. The writer, never identified, claimed Tiffany had wounded herself deliberately to frame Kris. The letter, full of accusations but lacking proof, became fuel for defense. After all, If Tiffany had initially said she did it to herself, why change her version later? Meanwhile, Kris's behavior added another layer of unease. Instead of panic, he displayed an almost rehearsed calm during interrogations. He maintained the composure of someone more focused on controlling his words and on expressing outrage over the accusation. For investigators, that demeanor was revealing. For his lawyers, it was simply the posture of a man wrongly accused. The investigation pressed on, but each step uncovered new contradictions. There was the victim's word, shaped by trauma and an initial moment of confusion, against a lack of hard evidence that could definitively place the blame on Kris. The case was turning delicate, where even the smallest mistake could mean freedom for a man accused of a brutal attempted murder. It was in this atmosphere of uncertainty that the police realized if they wanted to prove Kris's guilt, they were to go beyond the obvious, adopt bolder tactics, and create strategies capable of extracting from him what the evidence alone could not reveal. The game had only just begun. The investigation was hanging by a thread, with no weapon, conflicting statements, and an anonymous letter sowing doubt. There was a real chance that Kris could walk free or face nothing more than a minor charge. It was every investigator's nightmare, knowing a monster was right in front of them, but lacking the evidence to convince a court. That was when the decision was made to take a gamble, a tactic as risky as it was brilliant. If physical evidence was missing, there was still one weapon left: Kris's own words. Police needed a slip, a phrase that would expose his darkest intentions. To achieve that, they recruited an experienced informant, someone skilled enough to infiltrate Kris's mind with a tempting proposal. His mission: pose as a hitman and test just how far Kris was willing to go. The setup was meticulous. Hidden microphones, legal wiretaps, everything prepared to capture each word. Inside the cold walls of the jail, Kris believed he was facing an opportunity, and that's when his true nature surfaced. Without hesitation, he spoke about Tiffany as though she were an obstacle to be removed. He mentioned money, hinted at details, and made it clear that he wanted her to suffer again. There was no room left for doubt. On those recordings, Kris revealed himself not only as the man behind a brutal attempted murder, but also as someone willing to pay for a crime to finish what he had started. The chilling coldness with which he talked about harming the mother of his own child revealed a moral abyss difficult to comprehend. For investigators, it was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. For prosecutors, it was an irrefutable piece of evidence. And for Tiffany, still struggling to heal from physical and emotional scars, it was the cruelest confirmation of all. The danger had not ended the day she survived the attack. Even behind bars, Kris was plotting a second act. From that moment on, the game changed. What had once been a fragile case full of gaps now had a solid pillar. Undeniable proof of Kris's criminal mind. And for him, there was no turning back. His fate was sealed. The recording obtained with the undercover hitman hit the case like a bomb. For the prosecution, there was no room left for doubt. Kris had not only attacked Tiffany, but had also shown his willingness to finish the job, no matter the cost. This evidence shattered the image of a man wrongly accused and exposed a cold, calculating individual, ready to turn revenge into a contract. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Prosecutors presented the recordings, detailed the couple's troubled history, and highlighted every contradiction in Kris's behavior. The jury listened to his voice discussing money, suffering, and elimination of his ex-wife. No argument from the defense could neutralize the impact of those words. With each minute of audio played, Kris drifted further away from any possibility of innocence. Realizing the weight of the evidence, Kris eventually accepted a plea deal. He entered a no-contest plea, choosing not to challenge the charges. This decision placed him at the mercy of a sentence ranging from 6 years to life in prison. For Tiffany, it wasn't an absolute victory, but it was the assurance that her voice had been heard and that, at least for a time, she would be protected. The trial exposed not only the brutality of a crime, but also the fragility of a system that had nearly failed. Without the investigators' bold strategy, Kris might have walked away with a minimal sentence. That reality gave the proceedings a sharp undertone. The line between justice and impunity is far thinner than most imagine. Years later, during a parole hearing, prosecutors once again emphasized the danger of his release. Among them, Investigator Jen Daly described Kris as a dangerous man whose coldness made him unpredictable. For Tiffany, reliving everything in hearings was a cruel burden, but a necessary one. Each word was an attempt to ensure the past would not repeat itself. The trial did not simply close a case. It exposed the reality of abusive relationships that often reveal their most violent side when it's already too late. Kris was convicted, but Tiffany's scar remained the most vivid proof that justice, though fragile and hard-fought, had ultimately prevailed. The story of Tiffany Mead is not only about a brutal attack, but about the fragile line that separates love from hate, care from obsession, and the normalcy of a relationship from the silent violence that can erupt at any moment. What began as a young marriage full of promises and plans ended in an attempted murder, marked by the coldness of a man unable to accept the end. This case revealed deep wounds, the difficulty many victims face in speaking out, the heavy burden of confronting their abuser in court, and the fragility of a justice system that nearly allowed Kris to walk away with a light sentence. If it hadn't been for the boldness of investigators and Tiffany's courage to survive and tell her story, the outcome could have been very different. More than an individual tragedy, this story raises questions that echo far beyond the courtroom. How far can someone go when rejection turns into obsession? How many times does society turn a blind eye to clear signs of danger within abusive relationships? And most importantly, how many Tiffany's are still out there, fighting in silence, without the chance to survive and speak? The slash on Tiffany's neck eventually healed, but the symbolic scar reaches far deeper than skin. It is a reminder that violence can hide in the most intimate places, and that misplaced trust can become a death sentence. For her, life continued, though never the same. For Kris, conviction was nothing more than the inevitable consequence of dark choices. In the end, this is not just another crime case retold on television. It is a warning, a brutal mirror of how love can twist, how obsession can become a weapon, and how justice, though flawed, remains the only barrier between a victim and eternal silence. Because sometimes, the deepest scar is not the one the body carries, but the one forever engraved in the soul. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe justice was truly served in this case? Was Kris's sentence enough for the brutality of what happened, or did he deserve an even harsher punishment? Leave your comment below and share your perspective. Every opinion matters and helps keep the discussion alive about cases that, unfortunately, still mirror the reality of many people. If this video moved you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. That support allows us to continue bringing real stories, ones often far more disturbing than any fiction. Also, share this video with friends and family, so more people can learn what happened to Tiffany Mead and how thin the line between love and violence can be. Because in the end, these stories are not just about crimes, but about lives. And the worst tragedy of all is when they are forgotten